Hello, Vanguard community. It is Tuesday, June the 2nd, 2020. I'm Jennifer Methvin, the Chancellor at Arkansas State University-Beebe, and this is Doing Things Differently and Learning Something New. If you've joined us, you know this is conversations about how the current public health crisis has impacted our students and our faculty and staff at Arkansas State University-Beebe. But I have with me today the president of the Arkansas State University System, Dr. Chuck Welch. We want to expand the conversation just a bit today to talk about how this is impacting our system, our state, and our nation. And Dr. Welch is particularly in the position to help us have that discussion. Dr. Welch, why don't you do a little introduction of yourself for us?
Well, I am. Thank you, Jennifer. It's great to be with you. As Dr. Methvin said, I'm the president of the Arkansas State University System. I'm actually in my 10th year now in this position. Prior to that, I was president of Henderson State University, and I was chancellor of the University of Arkansas Community College at Hope, where Dr. Methvin and I got to work together. But perhaps most importantly, I was a former vice chancellor for academic affairs of ASU-Beebe, and so the campus is very special to me, and glad to be with you today.
We're glad you're here. I also want to point it out that you're serving in a couple capacities right now that give you a perspective on this from a state and a national perspective. So why don't you talk a little bit about the American Association of State Colleges and Universities and then the Economic Recovery Task Force too.
Sure. So I'm currently chairman of the board of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. It's a national organization that represents higher education institutions all across the country. It's based in Washington, D.C., and we spend a considerable amount of time with federal public policy advocacy and on behalf of our institutions. And then I was recently appointed by Governor Asa Hutchinson to the State Economic Recovery Task Force. And our mission is to find ways to adjust to the pandemic and find ways that we can reopen the state government in a responsible way, in a disciplined manner, and assist both our public and private entities in coping with what's been a very difficult time and what promises to continue to be a difficult time in the coming months.
And a very, very busy time as our phone's ringing and our emails being lets us know. Exactly. So it's safe to say that you have lived on Zoom pretty consistently since the 1st of March.
I have. We've been working remotely, and fortunately, a significant amount of my work can be done remotely, and so I have definitely spent more time on Zoom than probably ever before combined, but thank goodness for technology. I recently read an article about what if this pandemic had happened in 1980 instead of 2020, and it would have been a very, very different experience. So thankfully, technology is allowing us to continue our work and do so in a manner that, in many cases, allows us to operate as if we were sitting in our physical office.
Yeah, very good. Well, that's a great lead in to my first question. You've served as a president and as a chancellor and now as president of a system, and you get the questions the same as I do. Now, exactly what is it that you do? So why don't you talk about 2 or 3 of your roles as our system president and how those roles have changed a bit because of COVID-19.
Sure. So, a system head is not responsible for any one particular campus within that system. Obviously, we have chancellors like you who are responsible for the day-to-day operations of the campus. My job is more global in ensuring that we're able to find areas of synergy and collaboration among our campuses to affect public policy, to serve as a liaison between our Board of Trustees' responsibility for policy and our Chancellor's responsibility for operations. A big part of what I do is public policy advocacy. And that certainly has not changed as a result of the pandemic, but what has changed is almost 100% of the advocacy that I'm currently engaged in is related to the pandemic. It is so time-consuming and all-consuming, really, of all the different facets of our campuses that I've had to really sort of shelve those other types of issues that we might ordinarily talk about and really focus on the pandemic itself, focus on the impact that it's having on our campuses, and really try to educate policymakers and the general public to what is exactly happening. There's just so much misinformation out there, so much misunderstanding about federal money that's coming to our campuses and how that money can be used that things are much easier now that everything is online, or much less expensive for our campuses now that everything is online. There are rules and regulations that have been handed down from both the federal and state level that make our jobs even harder, and so we try to influence those. And so, while that's always a big part of my role, I don't think I've ever seen it to where it's so focused on one singular issue like this is with the pandemic. And then really that relates over to what the second, if you want to look at largest roles that I play, and that is campus assistance, and my role in trying to coordinate the relationships between our campuses, and as I said earlier, find those areas for collaboration. Again, everything else has really taken a back seat to this pandemic, and we've tried to focus on getting out legal interpretations to our campuses of what you can and cannot do as a result of some of those regulations that I just mentioned. Again, trying to get information from our campuses about some of the unique challenges that you're facing, and then take that and try to influence public policy. PPE, which I had never heard of that acronym before all of this started, and we're doing a system-wide consortium on purchasing. And as you know, Dr. Methvin, testing is going to be a critical component that we're going to have to be focused on in the fall as we bring students back to campus. And so if you look at the overarching roles and responsibilities that I have with public advocacy, with working with the Board of Trustees, with working with policymakers, with working with the campuses and trying to find collaboration opportunities, that really hasn't changed. What has changed, though, is that no longer are we talking about collaboration of academic programs or new funds for this particular area, or ways that we can be, more aggressive in certain areas. It's all focused right now on this pandemic. It has consumed almost 100% of my time, as I know it has for our campuses, and trying to balance all of the information that's coming at us from our students, from our faculty members, from concerned parents, from the state and state policymakers, and then certainly from the federal government. It's been a very challenging and interesting few months, and I think it will forever reshape higher education as we know it.
Yeah, must agree, all consuming. So certainly one of the reasons I'm doing this series, as I continually say, is because there has to be something to learn here, and we should learn it together and all come out on the other side as better servants to students and a better higher education system. So from your perspective, what have you learned so far, and whether that's about the nation or our system or higher education? What have you learned that will make us better moving forward?
Well, I think that, if I was going to point to one thing that I think probably will benefit us moving forward, it is this forced flexibility that has been brought upon us. We've joked before, only half joking, that higher education can tend to be one of the slowest to adapt and change. I've often said that wholesale change in higher education is like turning around a cruise ship. I mean, it takes a considerable amount of time, but we've had no choice through this pandemic. I mean, we've had to turn on a dime and react. We had to move everything online from an instructional standpoint. We had to change the way that we feed our students, the way we house our students, the way that we teach our classes. And I think that's been a good learning experience for us that hopefully will continue to reinforce to all of our personnel and to me and everyone else that we have to constantly be ready. Because I think now that we've had this sort of experience, I would anticipate we're going to have more of these types of experiences as we move forward, and we're going to have to be able to adjust and adapt. I do want to compliment our faculty and staff, particularly those who perhaps historically had no experience with remote instruction or remote work. I mean, they've responded to the call. They've been very quick in that learning. But I think the one thing we're going to have to do is, once we're back and face-to-face and this pandemic has hopefully passed, we don't just say, okay, we're past that, we don't have to worry about it anymore. We've got to constantly stay on our toes. We've got to have constant training. I think that's something that, so that the next time, or if there is a next time, God forbid, that we're able to even be quicker in the way that we're able to adapt and adjust. And then I think we're going to have to continue to look at non-traditional approaches to the way that we offer our higher education curriculum. I mean, I don't think we can continue to rely on solely online or solely face-to-face, or even, some of the more hybrid approaches. I think we're going to have to really always look at what's in the best interest. How do we adapt to all of these unique circumstances that we've had to do this time? But I think there is a real opportunity there for us to come out of this a much more nimble industry, and one that can be more responsive to rapid change in our society.
Yeah, have to agree. Mr. Moore and I, our Chief Financial Officer, this morning, we're having a discussion about how some colleges like Miami-Dade, those who live in fear of a hurricane at any moment, they didn't have quite as far to step out to go immediately remotely as we do. So there is much to learn here. Thank you for that, Dr. Welch. Well, of course, we're all working for our colleges and in higher education, but we're also moms and dads and church members and parents, and in my case, a grandparent. So what about you personally? What has been the most personally challenging part of working our way through this pandemic?
Well, I think, Jennifer, I'm sure you would describe me as an extroverted person. I think most people would describe me as that. And, I thrive on that interpersonal communications. And I got to be honest, I've struggled with it a little bit. I have found myself having Zoom meetings with my friends just to have some of that conversation and try to simulate that togetherness, I guess, if you will. And that's been hard for me. Now, I'm grateful, as I said earlier, that we've got this experience. One thing that I'm very grateful for is that this has forced me to spend more time with my three daughters. I mean, we get so busy and everybody's moving in all of their different directions. The quarantine, we have watched more movies together and eaten dinner together and done things like that a lot more. And so I look at that as the blessing in all of this. But, as you read these articles about individuals that are really struggling with mental health, with anxiety or with depression, or just because of the quarantine and the change in our lifestyle and routines and things, I get it, because as somebody who does really thrive on relationships and crowds and people and that engagement, I've struggled and I miss that. And I hope that's something that we can get back to sooner rather than later. Don't get me wrong. I want to make sure that when we do reassemble, that we do it in a very disciplined and responsible manner. But it's hard. And, I clearly understand why people want to. When you see these viral photographs of people all being together and not adhering to social distancing, on one hand, it really upsets me and I want to say, what are you thinking? On the other hand, though, I understand why they want to be together. But I think we just have to be disciplined and force ourselves, and just know that the longer that we're responsible, the quicker this can be over with, and hopefully we can get back to some degree of normalcy in our lives.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a pretty common response to that question.
Yeah.
Across this
I would imagine. It's tough. And, I joke that I've loved all the extra time with my kids. I'm not sure they feel the same way sometimes, but I think when we look back on this in 20 years, we're going to really, I think, cherish some of the memories that we've made and opportunities that we had. And I hope everybody will try to take advantage of that and hold on to that, because it is one of the few personal silver linings, I think, that exist with regard to what we've been through the last few months.
Yeah, I agree. I think we may come out better on the other side of this, of being able to make time for home and not work 24/7 as some of us tend to do.
Kind of put it, it's kind of like I said earlier, it forces us. This pandemic has forced us to be different in the way we operate at work. It's also forced us to be different in the way that we operate at home. And, that may not be, it may prove to be one of the best things that ever happened to us. And I hope that we do learn some lessons.
I agree. Well, I always, in the 5 questions that I ask my guests, I always allow one of those to be asked of me. So what's your question of me?
Well, I thought about this, and one of the hardest parts of my job is that I'm not on a campus. And so I don't have that daily interaction with students or that daily interaction with faculty and staff. And it's something I really miss from my prior presidencies, which were on campus. And sometimes I feel like maybe I get too disconnected and don't really have a good feel for what's happening on the ground. So I was interested, while we're talking about this pandemic, again, since it's all consuming, as chancellor of a campus, if you had an infinite amount of power and resources at your disposal, what would you use those for to improve the experience for our students or our campus community?
Yeah. Wow. And could you give me those things? Could you give me unlimited resources? That'd be great.
Sure, I'll get on that.
So, one of the reasons I did this series is because I wanted to talk to students and faculty and staff and learn about what their needs have been. And one of the interesting things that has come out of this is that almost to a student that I have talked to, whether it's been on this series or I meet with student government regularly and those sorts of things, they talk about their struggle with the lack of structure that happened over the semester. And so while some of them had some online courses, it was in subjects that they chose to take an online course. And they have compared a whole lot taking a course that they chose to take face-to-face and it going totally online versus some of our faculty who also enhance that with having lecture at the regular time and just doing it by Zoom. So that need to talk face-to-face with faculty, to see their academic advisors face on the screen as they talk through next semester, that personal touch. It's been very surprising that our traditionally aged students who we think of being so tech savvy and just as soon not come to class, they've actually said the opposite. They like that balance. They currently balance their schedule a lot with a couple of online and a few face-to-face. And so we've really been thinking about the best of that world. This would have been so much easier if every student had the setup that I have right here at my desk. If they had reliable internet, which this episode that you and I have recorded has proven that even you and I don't have the most reliable internet. If we didn't have to worry about those things and those things were not such an expense that students have to work around. Yeah. And so, if I had all-consuming power, the infrastructure for internet capacity across our state, I wish I could snap my fingers and solve that.
Absolutely.
That would help a great deal. The cost of that, if it could ever just be like air. But if we could even help our students negotiate the cost of that. And so much so have we thought about this that we're going to try to work our way toward being a device-ready campus with device-ready students. We just have to figure out how to help students afford that. And that way we know that students have in their hands, not one student, but all students, have in their hands what they need if we do need to go remote. But that's a pretty big ticket price. We just now completed an order assuring that every faculty member has a camera like I have right here at my desk, because we see for the foreseeable future, that's an advantage. That and some training for some of our faculty and staff that you mentioned who aren't as comfortable. It's not only what I would do if I had infinite resources, but we're trying to find the resources to do, to get there. Because again, I think this is what we're looking at toward to fall as well, Dr. Welch. We're going to have more online and more internet assisted, but more of our internet assisted is going to be at the class meets Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2 o'clock, and that's when your lecture will be, and that's when you'll log on. Our students have sort of told us that structure of the day. I do this, and then I go study a couple hours, and then I go to work, and then I have a late afternoon class, and then I need to do my online work. That structure and consistency is something they really, really crave. And so,
absolutely.
I think that would be a big part of what I would do with those infinite resources that I heard that you're going to get.
I'll get that by the end of the week.
Very good, very good. All right, I didn't promise anybody, as I usually do at the beginning of the semester, that this would be 5 questions in 15 minutes, because I didn't trust that you and I could do that.
No, never.
That's my aim at most episodes. But we are to the last question, and that is, if you have any predictions about how higher education is going to change, or even how our nation or our system is going to change, and what the silver linings, you said the word a few minutes ago, looking for the silver linings in all of this, what they'll be. What are your predictions?
You sort of alluded to this, but I think there is one just massive silver lining in this for higher education, and that is a reinforced value of higher education in the minds of Americans. I mean, I think we're going to see more and more individuals. One of the things that frustrates me to no end is people that talk about, is higher education worth it? And I think as we've seen, 25% unemployment and people that have lost their job at the drop of a hat, and certainly understanding there are college educated individuals that are losing their job too, we know that disproportionately it's those that don't have a college education that become unemployed. And so I think, number one, in the mindsets of many Americans, they'll see the value, and I hope to see them come back to higher ed and maybe have a different viewpoint. But the second piece of that silver lining that I think this is going to give us, and another one of my great frustrations, is when I hear the general public or policymakers say, why do we even need brick and mortar campuses anymore? Everything's going to move fully online. It's cheaper, it's easier. That's what students want. Why are we spending this money? And as you've already said, we're seeing the exact opposite of that. We're hearing from our students, this technology generation, we want to be back. And I think they realize the value of that personal interaction, as you talked about earlier. They realize that social aspect of a higher education that is so critically important to developing the well-rounded person. When I look at my three daughters, I have a high schooler, I have a junior high student, and I have an elementary student. So we kind of crossed the spectrum. And I watched those first few days after they said school's going to be done from home for the rest of the semester. They cheered, they jumped around. It was the happiest day of their life.
Like a snow day.
Like a snow day. And literally, within 2 or 3 weeks, they were begging to be able to go back because they missed their friends. They didn't like that experience nearly like they thought they would like that experience. And so when I saw it from that standpoint, and then I heard it from each of our campuses without exception, I think there's a great silver lining there that maybe will send the message that there is value to this. And we've had higher education, brick and mortar in this country since 1636 with the founding of Harvard. It's not going away anytime soon. And while technology is great, it's a complementary piece. And it's a piece that's for those individuals who can do it fully online and maybe have to because of life circumstances. But for thousands and thousands of college students, that one-on-one interaction, that social aspect, that personal engagement, this, I think, will reinforce to everybody just how critically important that is to earning a well-rounded education. And you know what? I mean, if nothing but that comes out of this, I'm going to consider that to be a very favorable outcome.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Dr. Welch, I have greatly enjoyed our conversation. I know you're very busy and also, like me, a little sick of Zoom. And so, so I appreciate you taking
a few more today, though, so as I'm sure you do.
Yes. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And thank all of you who are joining us for this series. It's important to me that we learn together and from one another during this crisis. So this has been learning, doing things differently, learning something new. The next time I join you, I will have with me Jason Henry. He's the director of our Student Success Center. And Jason has been very central in us providing remote services to students. Remote instruction is one thing, but remote advising and counseling and tutoring and those things, they're a challenge. And lots of people have been central on that. But Jason has really been a leader in that area, and I look forward to that conversation with him. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be with you.